Lindsay Elizabeth Buziak was born on November 2nd of 1983. She had a sister named Sarah, and she became very ambitious as she grew up. She secured a job as a real estate agent in Victoria, British Columbia, and her boyfriend, Jason Zylo, was a member of a wealthy family that owned a large real estate business. Lindsay herself was described as popular, outgoing, and very caring. She was also intelligent, clearly proven by the fact that she was only one of 20 realtors under the age of 25 in Victoria. While working for Remax Camosun with her boyfriend and his mother, Lindsay raked in $3.2 million for the company. As for her family life, Lindsay's parents had separated when she was a child, but she remained very close with her father, who was also a real estate agent. As her career continued to blossom, Lindsay moved into a one-bedroom condo near the harbor in Victoria alongside Jason. However, things would start to go downhill not long after the move. By the end of 2007, Lindsay had begun to complain about Jason's lack of ambition. He did not seem to share her aspirations, and Lindsay was feeling as if their relationship was not working. Despite telling her friends that she was thinking of ending the relationship, Lindsay ended up staying with Jason. At the very end of January in 2008, Lindsay received an unexpected phone call from a woman with a foreign accent that she believed to be Mexican. This woman told Lindsay that her husband's work was transferring him to Victoria and they desperately needed a new home. Their budget was $1 million, suggesting the client was already very wealthy. The woman gave Lindsay several specifications on the home she wanted. There needed to be a separate living space for a housekeeper, and the house needed to be empty already so that they could move in as soon as possible. Lindsay saved the phone number under the name $1 Million and began researching homes that fit the criteria. Later that same night, Lindsay emailed the client a list of potential homes, the first of which was 1702 D'Souza Place, a brand new 2-story house on a quiet cul-de-sac. The client replied that they were interested in 1702 and asked if they could meet at the property the next day. Lindsay agreed, even though she had plans to attend a bachelorette party that day. She informed Jason and his mother about the client, expressing her concern about the situation. As far as Remax Camosun went, Lindsay was a relatively new agent who wasn't very well known, so it seemed very strange that a random couple would have contacted her of all people, and in such a decisive manner. Nevertheless, she was determined to meet with the couple at 5:30 the next day. While Lindsay was preparing for the meeting, the client called her landline number. She was in the office at the time, so Jason answered. According to him, the client's accent sounded like broken Spanish. The woman said she would try Lindsay's cell number instead. Before leaving the office, Lindsay asked the receptionist to do a quick search for the client's name and number in the company database. This search turned up nothing, meaning that the couple had never worked with Remax Camosun before. That afternoon, Lindsay received a call on her cell phone from the woman's husband, who told her that he would be the person meeting her that evening. His wife would not be present, but he failed to provide a reason as to why this would be the case. This development made Lindsay much more nervous, and she asked Jason to wait in the car outside the house during the meeting. At around 5 p.m., Jason picked up a friend from an automobile repair shop. After helping his girlfriend, he planned on taking his friend out for some hockey and a few drinks. Business first, pleasure second. However, he was having trouble finding 1702 D'Souza Place. It was a new location that he had never been to before, and his GPS couldn't seem to find it either. At 5:30, he called Lindsay and asked for directions. She was about to explain the directions to him when she suddenly stopped and said, "I've gotta go, they're here." Around this time was when some neighbors of 1702 witnessed Lindsay standing at the front door. A man and a woman walked to the house and shook hands with her. The woman was blonde and either in her 30s or 40s. The man was white and 6 feet tall with dark hair. The trio entered the house and Lindsay began the showing. At 5:40 p.m., Jason arrived at 1702 D'Souza Place. He waited outside in his car just like Lindsay had asked him to, and at 5:45 he saw 2 figures standing behind the front door, putting on their shoes. They noticed his headlights and turned away from the door. Jason assumed the showing was still underway, so he drove down the block and parked on the side of the road, hoping to stay out of Lindsay's way. He didn't want to scare off a potential customer by appearing to be overprotective. Shortly before 6 p.m., Jason texted Lindsay to check in, but she failed to reply. He drove back to the house and attempted to call her cell phone, but she didn't pick up. Jason and his friend got out of the car and approached the house, then started to bang on the front door, calling Lindsay's name. Jason tried the door handle, but it was locked. They tried a side door, but that was also locked. Finally, in full-on panic mode, Jason called the police. As they waited for the cops to arrive, Jason noticed that the back doors of the house were wide open. He helped his friend get over the fence, then the friend unlocked the front door and let Jason inside. The moment Jason entered the house, he saw bloody footprints on the stairs. He ran upstairs and found Lindsay's body leaning against the wall, surrounded by a pool of blood. She had been stabbed multiple times. He attempted CPR, but it was too late. Once they arrived at the scene, the police took Jason and his friend into custody, where they questioned both men. Jason also took a polygraph exam. Both men were cleared of suspicion and released without being charged. The crime scene contained no DNA, no fingerprints, and no other physical evidence. Law enforcement concluded that the killers had escaped through the back door after noticing Jason's car idling outside. The cell phone the female killer had used to contact Lindsay had been purchased in Vancouver several months prior to the murder, although it had never been used before the call to Lindsay. It was under the name Paulo Rodriguez, which the police suspected was a fake name. It was registered to a real business in Vancouver, but detectives believe the business has no connection to the case, and the address was chosen at random. The phone was deactivated shortly after the murder and has never been used since. According to cell tower data, the device traveled from Vancouver to Victoria on a ferry the day before the murder. Various theories have been posited in the case over the years. On January 22nd of 2008, the largest drug bust in the history of Alberta was conducted. A friend of Lindsay's ex-boyfriend was arrested during this operation, which prompted law enforcement to consider the possibility that Lindsay's murder had been ordered by a drug cartel. This theory was investigated further, and detectives ultimately ruled it out. Homicide and crime scene experts examined the case in detail and concluded that Lindsay's murder was far too personal and amateurish to have been a hit from a criminal organization. The killers must have been someone with whom she was very close. Later, in 2008, a close friend of Lindsay's named Nikki received a phone call from an unknown number. The woman on the other line had a strange accent, which reminded Nikki of Lindsay's killer. She could not remember exactly what the caller said, but she did remember trying to call the number back at least 20 times. Finally, Shirley Zylo, Jason's mother, picked up. Nikki asked why Shirley had called her, and Shirley replied that she had meant to call her secretary, whose name was also Nikki. She also said that she didn't know why Nikki's number was in her phone. After these events, Shirley denied that they ever happened, and it remains unclear how credible this account is and whether or not it was ever investigated by the authorities. In 2020, the Capital Daily requested that public records relating to Lindsay's case be released. These documents revealed that the killers had used 2 phones. In addition to the device they had used to contact Lindsay, they had also used another phone to check the voicemail of the first device. There had also been a great deal of unusual internet traffic regarding Lindsay Buziak leading up to her murder. Furthermore, Lindsay had 700 Facebook friends in 2008. Between January 3rd and February 3rd of that year, nobody posted anything to her Facebook wall. This was highly unusual, and the authorities were able to determine that some posts had actually been deleted. However, nothing else has ever come of this. As it stands, many people suspect Shirley Zylo of the murder, although this has never been substantially proven. Hopefully the truth will be brought to light before long so that the killers can be brought to justice. On April 25th of 1971, 13-year-old Carol Denise Spinks was sent to buy some groceries from a 7-Eleven by her older sister. The gas station was located in Maryland, just half a mile from their home in Washington, D.C. As she was coming home, Carol was abducted by an unknown man. Her body was found 6 days later at 2:46 p.m. behind St. Elizabeth's Hospital in southeast Washington, D.C. The corpse was located on a grassy embankment next to Interstate 295. The authorities confiscated Carol's remains and performed an autopsy, which revealed that she had been SA'd before her death. The cause of death was determined to be strangulation, and she had various other physical injuries. She was fully dressed, with the exception of her shoes. On July 8th of 1971, 16-year-old Darlenia Denise Johnson was traveling to her summer job at Oxon Hill Recreation Center in Maryland. During her commute, she was abducted and driven away from the scene. A witness reported seeing an African-American male driving an old black car with Darlenia inside shortly after her abduction. 11 days later, Darlenia's body was found just 15 feet away from the location of Carol's body. Strangely enough, the police had been notified of the location of Darlenia's body by an anonymous caller almost a week earlier, but they hadn't bothered to check. By the time they finally decided to act, Darlenia's body was too badly decomposed for the medical examiner to determine a cause of death, but detectives were able to find evidence of strangulation nonetheless. Just like with Carol's body, Darlenia was fully dressed, with the exception of her shoes. On July 27th of 1971, 10-year-old Brenda Faye Crockett was sent to the store by her mother. She failed to return home, and the Crockett's phone rang 2 hours later. Brenda's 7-year-old sister answered because the rest of the family was searching the neighborhood. Brenda was on the other line, crying into the phone. She said, "A white man picked me up and I'm heading home in a cab." She then stated that she thought she was in Virginia before saying bye and hanging up. Shortly after this first call, the phone rang again and Brenda's stepfather answered. It was Brenda on the other line yet again, and she repeated the same thing she had said the first time. She added that she was inside a white man's house. Her stepfather asked to speak with the man, after which he heard a pair of heavy footsteps in the background. Brenda said, "I'll see you," and hung up. At 5:50 the next morning, a hitchhiker found Brenda's body on U.S. Route 50 in Prince George's County, Maryland, near the Baltimore-Washington Parkway. She had been SA'd and then strangled to death with a scarf. Her shoes were the only article of clothing that were missing. Law enforcement concluded that the phone calls to her family had been a means of throwing off the investigation and delaying the involvement of the authorities. On October 1st of 1971, 12-year-old Nenomoshia Yates was walking home from the supermarket in northeast Washington, D.C. at around 7 p.m. when she was abducted. Her body was found just 3 hours later next to Pennsylvania Avenue in Maryland. A witness had seen her entering a blue Volkswagen before the murder, and several unidentified green fibers were found on her body. The cause of death and circumstances of her murder were exactly the same as the previous 3. Finally, there was only one article of clothing missing, and I'm sure you can guess what it was for yourself. Nenomoshia's murder was what prompted the media to start using the moniker Freeway Phantom to describe the serial killer. On November 15th of 1971, 18-year-old Brenda Denise Woodard boarded a city bus at 11:30 p.m. to return home from dinner with a high school friend. Brenda's body was found 6 hours later by a police officer in a grassy area near Prince George's County Hospital. In Brenda's murder, the killer had broken his modus operandi. She had been stabbed multiple times in addition to being strangled, and her shoes had not been stolen. There was a jacket on top of her body with a handwritten letter inside one of the pockets. The letter read, "This is tantamount to my insensitivity to people, especially women. I will admit the others when you catch me if you can. Freeway Phantom." Handwriting experts determined that the note had been written by Brenda before the murder. They also speculated that she may have known her killer because the handwriting did not show any signs of unusual distress. On September 5th of 1972, 17-year-old Diane Denise Williams was boarding a bus at 11:20 p.m. to return home after visiting her boyfriend's house. A matter of hours later, her body was found next to Interstate 295, a little south of the DC border. There was no evidence of SA, but she had been strangled to death and her shoes were missing. Diane's murder would end up being the last one the Freeway Phantom would ever commit. The Metropolitan Police Department of the District of Columbia operated a telephone hotline with which they received a variety of tips. Many of these leads turned out to not be credible, but others were investigated deeply. The investigation was undertaken by a task force with detectives from homicide and sex crime squads, the FBI, the Maryland State Police, Prince George's County authorities, and Montgomery County authorities. Unfortunately, the investigation ran into some big roadblocks. Back in 1971, it was common practice for the original case files to be retained by the original investigators. Due to this conservative approach to investigation, the Freeway Phantom case files were each incomplete. Some of them were even lost, along with extensive notes and pieces of evidence. The detectives did identify several suspects in the case. First, there were members of a gang that operated in Washington, D.C. and Maryland who came under suspicion. I can't say the name of this particular gang on YouTube due to their strict policies regarding language, so I'll just refer to them by the first two words of their name: Green Vega. Green Vega was responsible for numerous incidents of SA and kidnapping in the area at the time of the murders. Members of the gang were interviewed by investigators while in prison for their previous crimes. During these interviews, one of the members stated that another member had been involved in the murders. The member who said this was an inmate at Lorton Prison, and he agreed to provide further information as long as the authorities kept him anonymous. The detectives agreed, and the inmate identified the man he believed to be responsible for at least one of the murders, and he even provided them with accurate information about the crime itself. This inmate had not been involved in the murder himself, he had only heard about it from his fellow gang member. Nonetheless, his story seemed highly plausible, and law enforcement were next to certain that they were almost ready to close the case, but a fatal mistake was made. A local politician who was running in an election publicly announced that the authorities had just come across a break in the case with information that had come from Lorton Prison. After this, the inmate refused to meet with the investigators any further and actually denied having provided the information in the first place. This lead ended up going nowhere. The second main suspect was a man named Robert Askins. Askins had been charged with murder on several occasions between 1938 and 1977. As a 19-year-old college student, Askins had served whiskey laced with cyanide to prostitutes at a brothel, which ended up killing 31-year-old Ruth McDonald. Just 2 days after this, he stabbed 26-year-old Elizabeth Johnson to death at the same brothel. When he was arrested, Askins stated that he was a woman hater. He was placed under observation at a mental hospital in Washington, D.C., where he broke free of his restraints and assaulted 3 orderlies. In 1939, Askins was determined to be criminally insane and was committed to St. Elizabeth's Hospital. He was released in 1952, and 5 months later he strangled 42-year-old Laura Cook to death. He was indicted for this murder and retried for the 1938 murders due to a new ruling that stated he was actually perfectly sane. Askins was sentenced to 20 years in prison, but this decision was overturned in 1958. In 1977, he was arrested and charged for the SA and murder of an unnamed 24-year-old woman. This arrest turned the detectives' attention to Askins as a potential suspect in the Freeway Phantom case. Law enforcement searched Askins' home, and they found court documents in a desk drawer. The judge had used the word tantamount in these documents, which was also used in the Freeway Phantom's letter. Being a fairly uncommon word, the use of tantamount in Askins' case further raised suspicion against him. The detectives questioned his colleagues at the National Science Foundation, and they mentioned that Askins used the word tantamount a lot, which struck them as odd. Law enforcement obtained a search warrant to dig up Askins' backyard, but they did not find any new evidence. When asked about the Freeway Phantom case, Askins denied having any involvement, stating that he did not have the depravity of mind required to commit any of the crimes. He passed away at the Federal Correctional Institution in Maryland in 2010. To this day, the case remains cold, and there is a $150,000 reward for any information. Hopefully some new information can come to light soon, so that the truth will be revealed. Click the join button to become a member today. Channel members receive exclusive content as well as early access to all my content. On August 24th of 2012, a Vietnam veteran was walking in the woods behind the Lake Lanier Club apartments in Gainesville, Georgia, when he spotted what he thought was a mannequin. Upon closer inspection, it turned out to be the dead body of 16-year-old Hannah Truelove. Hannah was living a troubled life before her murder. Her mother, Mona Harris, was known to be a heavy drinker, and Hannah had gotten into numerous concerning altercations with Harris. There had also been multiple incidents of her mother drunk driving. Hannah herself would frequently skip school, and her mother wouldn't know her whereabouts. The Division of Family and Children's Services had an open case with the Truelove family at the time, and the case manager had actually met with Hannah the day she disappeared. According to this case manager, Hannah had appeared to be fine. They talked about getting her math grade up so that she could go into 11th grade math. Hannah was last seen later that day at around 7 p.m. Her mother reported her missing at 9:30 p.m. Hannah had been stabbed to death behind her own home, and the police identified a likely suspect, although the man's name is not publicly known. What we do know is that the suspect is a man who knew Hannah before she was killed. However, the authorities do not yet have enough evidence to build a case against the man, which means that he remains free for the time being. Much of the physical evidence from the crime scene was washed away by heavy rains on the night of the murder, so the authorities are working with limited information. Law enforcement is hopeful that DNA testing technology will provide an opportunity to gain new evidence in the case, but this hasn't happened yet. Anyone with information regarding Hannah's murder is encouraged to come forward. Your information could be the thing that results in a conviction.